Welcome back, students. We are on the final lecture video for our modular on diversity and social justice. And we want to spend some time and talk about the concept of class relative to social and economic justice. The term classism is the discrimination towards members of a group because of their economic status. People at the low end of the economic structure experience class-based discrimination regardless of ethnicity, so across all ethnicities. Women and people of color are more likely to be poor because of oppression, and therefore women and people of color are more likely to experience discrimination based on class. The term underclass is the oppressed people unable to escape poverty due to societal barriers. Underclass will increase without access to higher education and training and technology, and increases in underclass impacts us all. So the more that we see an increase in people who are living for instance, below the poverty level, are not able to sustain a living wage, are not able to provide for themselves in terms of housing and food, we are going to be impacted as a society because we will start to see an increase in our homeless population, in people who are possibly exploring other options in terms of securing support, possibly crime. So all of those things will contribute to our experience if we don't work in terms of trying to address the needs of the underclass. Moving on and taking a look at social and economic justice from the viewpoint of race and ethnicity. Race and ethnicity, obviously physical characteristics where people are singled out because of their physical or cultural traits. It's expected that people will adopt values and behaviors of the dominant group. And I apologize for the slide, I'm not sure what the problem is, but the concept of cultural pluralism is the coexistence of groups whose cultural differences are respected as equally valid. So cultural pluralism really talks about sort of the ideal of what we could be striving for in the future, where there's equity and equal respect for the traditions and cultures of one group as opposed to another, and that there's not necessarily a dominant group culture that is expected to be adopted by everyone in the country. So just systematically, we're going to go through and take a look at various ethnicities, and starting off with African Americans represent approximately 14.3% of the US population. Significant number live in southern states, significant number live in inner cities, and income is about 2/3 that of whites. And I want to say, in terms of all of these statistics, that when you're talking about income, obviously we're talking about in general. There certainly are people who are living in the upper income brackets that are people of color. But for the vast majority of the population, that's what this is reflecting. In terms of Latinos, about 15% of the US population, expected to comprise 25% of the US population by 2050. The largest subgroup in terms of Latinos in the United States are Mexican Americans. And there's a growing number of new immigrants from South and Central America becoming the new poor, working often in lowest wage jobs. We'll talk more about those that are attempting to immigrate and the challenges that they're experiencing in a future modular. Asian Pacific Islanders, this would include, Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Thais, Malaysians, Pakistanis, Filipinos, Cambodians, Indians, Vietnamese, and Pacific Islanders. Less than 5% of the total US population, with Chinese being the largest subgroup, followed by Filipinos and Asian Indians. Just as a point of clarification, so those would be people from India. Many groups within the Asian Pacific Islander community, they will preserve their heritage by living in enclaves in urban areas. So there's where you have examples of things like Chinatowns. Despite efforts to assimilate, Asian and Pacific Islanders still experience much discrimination. Language barriers result in discrimination. Many groups live in poverty and substandard conditions. And we know that historically Japanese Americans were placed in internment camps during World War II. And of course, for us in the Central Valley, we want to acknowledge our Cambodian, Vietnamese, Laotian communities as being a part of the Asian and Pacific Islander group. Native Americans represent less than 5% of the US population. They've experienced considerable oppression since early immigrants first came to the US. They are a diverse group. 75% report being members of one of the approximately 300 tribes in the US. Many live in poverty conditions on reservations in rural areas. Others are residing in more urban settings. We talked earlier about this term of populations at risk. And so really here we're talking about all folks that are experiencing some kind of level of injustice in terms of social injustice. But there have been efforts and there have been events that have occurred in our country that have been significant in terms of these populations. And some of those include the integration of the military in 1948, the school desegregation efforts that happened in the 1950s, in addition, continuing to integrate schools through busing in the 70s and 80s, the Civil Rights Act, which was obviously a very significant piece of legislation, passed in 1964, amended in 65, prohibited discrimination based on race, religion, color, or ethnicity in public facilities, government programs, or those operated or funded by the federal government and employment. Civil Rights Act, with the Civil Rights Act comes affirmative action, equal employment opportunities, compensatory justice, these legal mandated programs established within education, business, and industry to improve opportunities for people of color and for women. So again, the Civil Rights Act was really, out of that came the Voting Rights Act, out of that came the ending of separate but equal, and so very significant in terms of our history and very significant as a social justice effort. So what about social work and social workers and their role in terms of civil rights? The social work profession is committed to social justice. We're committed to achieving a society in which all members have access to the same rights and privileges without regard to gender, race, ethnic affiliation, creed, age, sexual orientation, or physical and mental capacities. And we achieve this through the work that we do with our clients, but we also achieve this through the advocacy work that we do in our communities, the work that we do with our legislators, the work that we do with our city council members, our board of supervisors, our advocacy, and the efforts that we make in terms of trying to address issues around social justice. This is where I've talked to you about before, is making sure that you've got really dependable and reliable sources of media and news so that you're able to stay informed about what's happening, because there's so much that's going on around social justice right now on this at this time in our country's history. And so it's exciting and it's interesting. But as social workers, this is a significant part of what you're expected to be familiar with. And so it becomes important for you to be able to find some good, reliable resources, not social media, as a way of being able to stay informed about what's happening around social justice issues. The NASW and the Council on Social Work Education give high priority to inclusion in both education and practice. So both the NASW and the CSWE strive for making sure that people of color, gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender folks, obviously women, are all given high priority in terms of introduction and welcoming them into the career of social work. Focus on strengths of individuals and groups to which they belong, as well as impact of discrimination and oppression on client and client systems. Again, using our strength-based perspective for both individuals and groups, and emphasizing advocacy for and empowerment of at-risk populations. And I believe that that is our final slide. So I hope that you will take a look at the videos that I have uploaded as part of this modular, and we'll be meeting during office hours on Tuesday. And if you have any questions or want to pop in, that will be from 6 to 7 on Tuesday of this week. So thanks very much. Have a good rest of your day.